sure can speak to Ayyub's case more specifically and the struggle around that. I wanted to start first with some statistics that came out this year in a new report released by the Council of American Islamic Relations titled Legislating Fear, Islamophobia, and Its Impact in the United States. And it talks about how actually within the political spectrum, how there's actually the sentiment around Muslims and Islamophobia has actually shifted around to the right more among liberal citizens. After bin Laden's death, more Americans agreed that Muslims living in the United States increased the likelihood of terrorist attack, 27 versus 34% previously, and that they make America a more dangerous place to live at 25% from 17. And this is liberals, people who identify as liberals. At the same time, fewer respondents agreed that Muslims living in the United States are supportive of the United States. That's 62% versus 52% previously, after the killing of bin Laden, which, by the way, happened under Obama's presidency. These shifts were all among liberals and moderates. The percentage of liberal respondents who agreed that Muslims in the U.S. increased the likelihood of terrorist attack and make America a more dangerous place to live shifted from 22 to 33 and from 8 to 24, respectively. In contrast, the percentage of conservative respondents who agreed that Muslims in the U.S. increased the likelihood of terrorist attack and make America a more dangerous place to live did not significantly change after the killing, 38 pre and 36 post, respectively. And I think this really speaks to the fact that while there was a new president, while Obama, to some people represented a different shift, actually that was at face value, I think, purely rhetorical in some respects. Another study by the Public Religion Research Institute cited that 30% of the American public believe American Muslims want to establish Sharia law in the United States, and that Islamophobic rhetoric remains socially acceptable. In another research released in 2011, citizens are quite comfortable to not only oppose extending citizenship to legal Muslim immigrants, but also being public about that fact. So these are actually, these are the implications and impact of a decade of scapegoating Muslims since 9/11. And I think it actually does represent a shift around the fact that Islamophobia has not been challenged in any way, sort of shape and form that's effective, even though there was a movement against the war in Iraq. The presidency of Obama promised for a lot of voters a shift from the Bush era. So people wanted an end to the war in Iraq. People wanted a defense of civil liberties. People wanted, better relations for Muslims in the Middle East, and certainly in many of his speeches, that was sort of the rhetoric around the axis of evil, the rhetoric around the war on terror was abandoned, but the policies remained, I think, and that's where you sort of see this, these statistics really hold. And so this is important because these are the ideas that we that Americans are constantly bombarded with, obviously. So these are the ideas that Muslims are faced with when they're prosecuted by the media, when they're prosecuted in the courtroom. These are the ideas that for many of the people on that display, this is what the juries are faced with when, on the first day of the trial, or even before then, when the media has manufactured the case against Muslims who are accused of terrorism charges. Bear in mind those statistics, right. So I'm going to sort of take a step back and look through other statistics around the impact or whatever, or the dangers around Islamic terrorism. So study after study shows that you're more likely to die in a lightning strike or a car crash, or from lack of health insurance in this country than you are of dying in a terrorist attack. You're more likely 8 times, in fact, to be killed by an American cop or a toddler who is in possession of a gun than you are to be killed by Islamic terrorists. In a 10-year period, 11 people were charged in the terrorism charges between 2001 and 2011, with killing 33 people, are about the same number of people killed by 3 white males last year in a movie theater, in a elementary school in a suburb in Connecticut, and in a Sikh temple in Wisconsin. And the number of hate groups in the far right, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, have jumped from 149 organizations in 2008 to 1,007 in 2012. Of course, at the same time, 50% of all American Muslims have been visited by the FBI at least once since 9/11, and thousands of Muslims have been surveilled, interrogated, charged, and imprisoned for largely, predominantly manufactured plots by the FBI. And bear in mind, obviously, we don't actually have any sort of studies. Largely, our law enforcement or Homeland Security bases much of or manufactures the sort of the spectacle of the Muslim terrorist with theories around radicalization that never actually come up when we do talk about the kind of violence that we have seen around mass shootings that predominate largely by white males. So yeah, the ideology of Islamophobia right now has actually produced an entire industry that fosters Islamophobia, creates a climate for hate crimes, support for wars abroad are absolutely critical to that, and the intellectual and legal support for certifying anti-Muslim laws. 78 bills have been designed to sort of that are against Sharia law, and sort of this sort of we want American laws for Americans has come up, and you have in 24 states these laws have been introduced, and 7 states have passed these laws. And of course, Islamophobia is the bigoted ideology that attributes to Islam a uniquely authoritarian, violent, anti-democratic, misogynistic characteristics that sees it as a static religion that has a sort of that needs to be civilized. Obviously, this predates 9/11. This is part of the ideology of Orientalism that had to be produced by European colonial conquest in the Middle East and in North Africa, that attributes to Muslim sort of savage characteristics that the white man needs to save. Brown women from brown men, you have all these characteristics, and that largely, this is the ideology that predates 9/11, but was incredibly important to rehabilitate after that. Let's see. So it is a form of racism that is distinguished from others in many respects, because both of its proponents, liberals and conservative, don't justify it as, this is a necessary infringement of human rights. But exactly because they say we actually are speaking in the name of human rights and equal rights when we are attacking Muslims. So you have ideas about, Iraq needs to be bombed so we can give them democracy. Afghanistan needs to be bombed because we need to save their women. And of course, last year when NATO met in Chicago, you had these billboards that were paid for by Amnesty International on buses that basically congratulated NATO and told them not to leave Afghanistan so they can save, in the name of women's rights. And so Islamophobia in the Obama era obviously looks a little bit different than you're either with us or you're against us. In this sort of new climate, there's this dichotomy between good Muslims who cooperate with us, dialogue with us, who are willing and able to help law enforcement, sit and dialogue with them, but also can support U.S. Wars abroad and root out the extremists in our communities. That's sort of the role in much of the new sort of era of Muslim relations with the Obama administration has been. And then, of course, you have the bad Muslims who don't comply. The Ayyubs, the Tariq Mahanas, and so on, who refuse to be FBI informants, who refuse to go into their mosques and snitch on other members of the congregation. And so those are obviously the bad Muslims, and so they have to pay. And so, of course, Islam is always on trial, regardless of the rhetoric that's put forward. And so you obviously, from the beginning, from the outset, you had much of, there's both the sort of outward attack on, women wearing hijab, firebombing of mosques, and so on. So those are sort of the more outward attacks. And then there are, of course, the more insidious ones that are brought in when the state actually has a case against Muslims. So, for example, the Holy Land Foundation is one of the most famous Islamic charity groups that was shut down by executive order after 9/11, and its members were charged with material support for terrorism for giving aid to Palestinians in Gaza. And basically what they said was, you're giving aid to Hamas. When in fact, well, they're in sanctions, this is an elected government, and actually they're in sanctions for a reason, because the United States has been complicit in allowing Israel to put them under siege. So that's sort of the more clearer examples. But that charity actually, that basically impugned that all Muslims who exercise one of their basic tenets of Islam, which is to give to charity, now have to be on watch, because their accounts, their assets will be frozen, they will be charged with material support for terrorism, and which has become this incredibly amorphous charge that's thrown out at anything. So, the cases of like Fahad Hashmi, for example, providing material support for terrorism constituted allowing an acquaintance to come to his apartment because supposedly the acquaintance had waterproof socks that were going to go to Al-Qaeda. So this sort of absurd idea that anything constitutes material support for terrorism. Similarly, I think you clearly saw during the Boston Marathon bombing, the elder brother, Tamerlan Tsarnaev, the media did not focus on the fact that he was largely an avid reader of extremist anti-government far-right literature, conspiracy theory, in a lot of ways, which has largely been the fodder of a lot of attacks. You think of sort of the LAX shooter recently at the airport in Los Angeles and so on, largely influenced by the far right. That was not the main thing that the media parroted on and on. It was the fact that they said he started praying 5 times a day. And so any attempt to practice your religion is immediately, according to radicalization theories of the FBI and Homeland Security, is a trigger to say that you are plotting a terrorist attack on the United States. Let's see. Are we with it? Awesome. Right, and this is obviously, how do we fight this? I'm just going to sort of go right in. And I think this is where the struggle to free Ayyub is really, I think, quite rare and really important to actually have organizing, around the case of Tariq Muhammad, who was who was a pharmacist from a suburb in Worcester, Massachusetts, refused to inform on his community, significant community leader, refused to plead guilty. They harassed him, arrested him twice. Arrested him before he left the country because he could no longer, live in these sort of conditions of being harassed all the time, and slapped him with all these charges, including translating a book from Arabic to English. Exercising was another one. I remember on the first day of the trial, they just kept playing like reels of the 9/11 bombing and Bin Laden, and that's sort of immediately the first thing that the jury sees that sort of sets that. And I think it's really important that Ayyub has the kind of multiracial, broad struggle around this that defends Muslims from state repression, because I actually think the fact that there isn't enough solidarity is the reason why Muslims will plead guilty for lighter sentences, which is just basically means not life, but what it actually means is like 15 years, basically half of your or whatever your life. It's because there's not enough solidarity to actually be able to fight that, or a lack of solidarity means that the mosques feel that they need to be in a position where they are neutral. They don't say anything when they're informants in their congregation, or they actually cooperate with the FBI because they fear that they'll cause they'll make it worse. And I think that's really critical to actually say that, because we want a shift. The question of community support is really critical to shift things away from solutions around the state. As we clearly saw around the Boston Marathon bombing, largely the city accepted a complete lockdown of the city, complete martial law, unprecedented in any city in the country, was just civil liberties were just given away. Because of the fear factor was so incredibly strong, there wasn't even a second thought that the city is under lockdown and there are tanks on our street. So I think that's really important that we actually have that. Secondly, I think the Muslim community needs to cut against this dichotomy of good Muslims versus bad Muslims, and soundly reject FBI surveillance and entrapment, and I think demand that beyond rhetoric, we actually want real action. And I think you saw that especially around the NYPD surveillance. So when the Associated Press released a report that the NYPD was spying on, in Muslim restaurants and student groups and mosques and in New Jersey and New York, you had an outcry and organizing that happened. You had a number of Muslim leaders who boycotted Mayor Bloomberg's New Year's breakfast. They boycotted this Ramadan NYPD conference that came out. There was sort of a sense that we refused to comply with this, and I think that was incredibly important, and actually forced the mayor-elect to say he would do something about it. Although it's the FBI spies on Muslims, so it's actually a question of federal policy of organizing that needs to be national. And I think that, but those are the sort of the first steps, I think, in terms of rejecting that. Most critically, I think we have to sort of invert this sort of common sense logic that Americans are safer and freer today because of the war on terror. This idea that, maybe we don't have enough terrorist attacks or whatever because it's working, And I think that's clearly, not only is it false, and not only is it racist, but I think it actually prevents the majority of ordinary people, the 99% to use Occupy's term, it actually prevents them from thinking through what does it actually mean for us, and the fact that we are actually far less freer, more of our rights have been taken away as a result of the war on terror. A country that's founded on slavery and genocide constantly has to build up a mythology of itself as a country that's equal and so on. But I think especially given that Islam, no Muslim country has ever invaded the United States, the kind of ideology that needs to be produced about the dangers of Islam is just as strong, because I think that the conditions for the U.S. being able to hold over 1,000 bases around the world, military bases, be able to have strategic hold of countries in the Middle East, in Central Asia, in Africa. I think that there's obviously the sense that Islamophobia is really critical in terms of scapegoating, both domestically and to justify that, even though the Pentagon itself acknowledges to some degree that there's only a couple hundred people in Al-Qaeda itself. It's negligible. And yet this ideology continues to be produced. It's not simply the case that Islamophobia is just a way to distract people from, the real issues. I think that there are actually material consequences to that, to convincing a majority of people that they don't need to care about scapegoating of Muslims. And it's clear that there's a reason why the government isn't funding a war on poverty in the midst of an austerity, in the midst of the fact that people are living in economic precarity. It's not profitable. It is not strategic for the largest empire in the world right now. The $1 trillion that's used to fund the Iraq and Afghanistan occupations as coming back in a different way, and obviously they won't speak to it that way. But it's clearly the reason why there is a deficit, and there's a reason why it is coming back in terms of cuts to Social Security and Medicare as we know it. There are actual reasons why not fighting against Islamophobia is creating more immiseration for for all Americans actually. And also, I think we witnessed sort of the public relations campaign around Malala Yousafzai, young Pakistani girl who was attacked by the Taliban for being an education rights leader. And of course, she toured around the U.S. She spoke to Obama, and she was portrayed as, and she is an incredibly brave woman who fights for education. And yet, in this country where hundreds of schools are closed, young Black and Latino children are basically more likely to go to prison than they are to go into college. The Taliban didn't create that. Actually, the people in power in this country have done that. And so the idea that there is the U.S. can act as a liberator that is enlightened abroad, and yet the double standards remain at home in a deeply racist country. Those contradictions need to be fleshed out more, I think, by people in struggle. Similarly, I think when you think about how Islam is portrayed as sort of a uniquely misogynistic religion, unlike Christianity and Judaism, there's something really inherent about sort of its hatred towards women, it's the way it treats them. It really plays out in an interesting way in a country like the United States, where you can be arrested for murder if you have a miscarriage, which happened in the state of Georgia. But in the same state that passed an anti-Sharia law in North Carolina, they actually tacked on an attack on abortion rights within that legislation. And it was very interesting, because it's like clearly this attack is actually happening in another form, but they're hoping that if they just promote it as a law against foreign Muslims invading the United States, that they can take away the rights of women. I think this is very this is fodder, I think, for actually being able to unite our struggles, but it actually needs to be made more deliberate, and those connections need to be made more. And obviously, there's nothing more dangerous, I think, than actually U.S. policy and U.S. laws. Obviously, when you think about, for example, stand your ground, 3 strikes laws that actually, kill black and brown people in this country, that actually needs to be challenged as the most profound kind of violence against people that in no way, shape, or form has Islam played any part in that. But also, I think we clearly the massive state surveillance infrastructure. Maybe folks can talk more about that. That had a precedent, obviously. Prior, the NSA surveillance that is now basically spying on the entire world, actually had its precedence in being able to justify that on the basis that we are spying on Muslims only. And so people were willing to accept that at a certain point. After 9/11, obviously, because those are the only people who are being spied on, it's legitimate. Obviously, that's not how the state functions, and now I think what you're seeing is the precedent that was set and that was built on, which, by the way, has its own precedent in the way in which this country has repressed previous groups in the civil rights movement and so on. But that actually now is being justified again by saying we don't want to spy on our allies and American citizens, which implies we want to spy on our enemies who are Muslim. And so I think we need to combat that, the underlying reasons, because those are still dominant. And of course, I think the mass violence that is a feature of American society, that's an epidemic, basically, like mass shootings every month or so. I mean, that has everything to do with the militarization of the society. And when you hear about these shooters who wear fatigues, who maybe have a history, with in the U.S. military and so on, those are actually products of the fact that the U.S. Has its wars, carries out its wars, and those come back into this country via the militarization of the police and an entire infrastructure that's built around things like the Joint Terrorism Task Force that actually centralizes all these different law enforcement aspects after 9/11. That actually is part and parcel of the violence that sort of explodes in the rest of society. And so I think when we look to that, it's not the question simply of gun ownership, but it's actually like what produces that. It's a country continually at war.
You're at time.
Okay, I think I'll just end it there. But I guess to me, I wanted to sort of open that up as a question of how are we able to bring all these different connections and commonalities together and actually organize a struggle around Islamophobia that's specific about how we're actually all freer when we actually free Muslims who are under state repression right now.
Hi, my name is Lynne Jackson, and I'm from Project Salam in Albany, New York. And I'm the one who brought the display and the pictures. And I just want to follow up on something that Sofia said about victims of Islamophobia. The people on this display in green are Muslims, and most of them have been given really incredibly long sentences. Life plus 30 years, 15 years, 22 years. And the pictures of the people on the floor are photographs of other Muslims who've been in prison. Some of them, like Tariq Mahana, got 17 years. Farouk Ahmad pled guilty, got 22 years, pleading guilty so he would avoid life in prison. But the interesting thing about all these people is that in all of their cases, no one was ever hurt, no one was hurt, and there was no property damage. And yet they are serving these incredibly long sentences. And it's like, well, so what is going on? And I'd like to talk about, just to give an example so you can understand like what the government does to Muslims. I'm going to talk about a case in Albany a little bit, and then I'm going to expand out a little bit about what we think is going on with these particular cases where the Muslims are so targeted. On August 4th, 2004, two Muslim men in Albany, Yassin Aref and Mohammed Hussein, were arrested by the FBI. Their houses were raided in the middle of the night, and their wives and children were terrorized. This raid and arrest in Albany, did anyone hear about it? It's been a little while, it's been 10 years. Right? So, this was a huge story in Albany. Albany may be the capital of New York State, but it's a little tiny city. And the raid was huge. It was just huge. The FBI had a press conference. The governor came, the mayor came. It was a really big deal. It was big news in Albany. And what happened is that, so what happened in this case? So Yassin Aref was the imam of the Masjid Salam Mosque in Albany. And he and his wife were UN refugees from northern Iraq. And they came to Albany in 1999 from Syria. Yassin had actually survived Anfal, which was Saddam Hussein's systematic extermination of the Kurds. Mohammed Hussein was a pizza shop owner. He'd lived in this country for 20 years. He was a very proud American. He was so happy to have his American citizenship. And he worked very hard, and he supported his wife and 6 children with a small pizza shop and renting apartments. The Aref Hussein case was created by the FBI because it's hard as an American sometimes to think the FBI does this, but they actually create these cases. They create them. And so what they did, the FBI sent an informant in. The FBI was interested in Yassin Aref. That was the target. To them, Mohammed Hussein was collateral damage. So to make this involved plot, so the FBI created this plot. So they send in an informant named Shahid Hussein. So they send the informant in, and the informant goes to Mohammed Hussein and says, "Oh, brother, you're so good in the religion. Teach me your religion. I want to learn your religion. Oh, you're such a good man. Let me loan you money." And Mohammed Hussein, who was a very proud man, said, "No, I don't need your money." And Shahid said, "Oh, please, please, I'll loan you money. I'll loan you $50,000, and you only have to pay back $45,000. Please let me." So at any rate, this goes on for months. Like, I always thought if you had a sting operation, the policeman stands on the corner, and they say, "Hey, you want to buy some dope?" And then you say yes or you say no, and then you get arrested or not, right? That's a sting operation. But that's really not a sting operation. What the FBI does with these kinds of cases is it goes on for months and months and months and months and months. So finally, Mohammed Hussein had financial challenges, and he accepted the loan from Mohammed. And but of course, the FBI was after Yassin. They didn't care about Mohammed, and they wanted Yassin. But Yassin was the imam of the mosque, and one of the roles of an imam is to witness loans. And so Shahid got Mohammed to say, "Let's get Yassin to witness the loan." So Yassin witnessed the loan. And for that, those 2 men got 15 years in prison.
Wow.
15 years in prison for doing that. For taking a loan, witnessing a loan. Can you imagine? Can you imagine our government, what it would like to be an immigrant to this country, to come to this country because you believe in the American ideals, and the government tricks you like this? It's absolutely disgusting. Anyway, all of these cases have endless details. I know many people here were interested in working on Ayyub's case, which is wonderful. And there's all these myriad details of the cases. All these cases have all these details. But in Yassin's case, it just boils down to Yassin witnessed a loan, Mohammed took a loan. And for that, they got a amount of money that if you had not been Muslim, you just would, make an adjustment in the books. You got 22 years in prison. But that's because he raised money for charity in Iraq. But there are many cases. I don't want to go into all the detail of all of them. the cases I think that are the easiest to understand are the entrapment cases where the FBI creates these incredible cases, and they basically, these days, they don't get imams anymore, but they trick young Muslim men who may have emotional or mental challenges, and they trick them into, they persuade them and trick them into doing things that, they probably shouldn't be doing, such as the case going on now is Mohammed Mahmoud in Seattle, Portland, I think. I've heard Seattle, you might know. And he was tricked by the FBI into, supposedly he had these bombs, and it was of course a lighting of a Christmas tree, because we have to have that. I mean, the FBI picks the targets, right?
Right.
So, they're going to pick a target, they're going to pick a Christian target or whatever. Anyway, a Christmas tree lighting, supposedly he called the cell phone number that would blow up the bombs, that would blow up the Christmas tree, the Christmas light, all these people would die. But of course, the FBI built the bombs, they talked him into doing it, and right now he's on trial. Anyway, so we looked at, like what is going on here, and it's the whole idea that, the government in 2010 released a report of 400, quote, terrorist acts. And we analyzed all of those cases, those 400 cases. And we believe that about 90% of those cases or more were either preemptive prosecution, where the government either tricked them using an informant, or it was a charity case, such as the Holy Land Foundation that Sofia talked about. Or there's a couple other categories of cases that we look at. And so it was preemptive prosecution, so prosecution without a crime having been committed. But ultimately, so the government says, well, look what we're doing, we're keeping us safe. But I don't think that the government creating these cases really makes us safe at all. I mean, I think it is simply outrageous. So basically, I just want to summarize, because I don't want to spend a lot of time, but some of the, just to explain, there was a case in Newburgh, New York, called the Newburgh 4, where the FBI was this big deal when they arrested him. The target, of course, was a synagogue and a Jewish community center, of course, and the FBI picked the target, so they didn't pick the Episcopalian church. Oh, no. They picked the Jewish synagogue, I think, to foment, racial tensions. But in that case, the FBI supplied everything. They supplied the money. They supplied food for the guys they entrapped, because they were all so broke they often couldn't buy food for themselves. They had the fake explosives. They actually had a house that they rented or built or whatever, where the FBI informant could bring the men to talk to them. I mean, for months. I mean, they had this house for months and months and months. And they even supplied they supplied all the fake bombs. They supplied the disabled missile. They supplied everything. And I think it's pretty outrageous that we're doing it. There's a new book out by Trevor Aronson. It's called The Terror Factory. And one of the things that he wrote about, which I think is very interesting, is he said, in fiscal year 2011-2012, the FBI allocated more than $3 billion of its $7.8 billion budget to counterterrorism. By comparison, the FBI's criminal division, responsible for investigating organized crime and financial fraud, among other areas, received $2.5 billion. So the government is spending this billions of dollars to say they're keeping us safe from terrorism. But of course, they don't want to tell the truth, which is there aren't any domestic Islamic terrorists as the government defends. At least I don't think there are. That's my personal opinion. That there just aren't any, and the government is creating them. So at any rate, I would like to, there's two more things I'd like to do. One of my friends wrote a poem, and this is if the FBI comes to visit you. So it's really important to remember this poem. And this is, because it's not good to talk to, the reason you should not talk to the FBI is that when the FBI does these cases, they record hundreds of hours of tape, videotape, audio tape, hundreds of hours, right? But when they bring you into their offices They do not record the conversation when they interrogate. Interview you. They do not record that conversation. And so, like in Yassin's case, he was interrogated through the night because they arrested him like 11 o'clock at night and it went on until 8 in the morning or whatever. And he was asked, do you know this Cracker, who's a Kurdish man from Norway. Anyway, and Yassin said, no, I don't know him because he had never traveled with him. He'd met him, but it wasn't like he knew him. You know what I mean? Anyway, so the FBI, he was actually convicted on lying to the FBI because the FBI didn't record the conversation. So there was no way to go back and say, well, what exactly did Yassin say and what did the FBI agent say? It's all based on the FBI, they write notes afterwards. And so it's either the FBI agent's notes versus what the person says. So, if the FBI comes to visit, this is what happens. The FBI says, hi, I'm from the FBI. And then you should say, well, I can't trust you because you lie. Call my lawyer and goodbye. Why can't I come inside? Call my lawyer and goodbye. Have you something to hide? Call my lawyer and goodbye. But where is your patriotic pride? I have the Bill of Rights on my side. Call my lawyer and goodbye. So if the FBI ever knocks on your door, you say, give me your card and I'll have my lawyer call you. And usually that stops everything. So Yassin Aref, who is still sitting in prison, and he writes poems. So I'm going to read a poem from Yassin. And he calls his poem Soul. As they say, when someone dies, you need to open a window, allow his soul to get out, and fly back to the sky. I am wonder if I will die in this prison cell, where there is no window. What will happen to my soul? How will it fly? Where will it go? Thank you very much.
Good evening, distinguished guests, moderators, supporters of Ayyub, supporters of the human family. I'm very touched by the audience here tonight because some of the audience come from the very region that Ayyub lives. Maybe about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that I see. How many of you knew Ayyub? By a show of hands. 1, 2. And how many is here to support Ayyub? By a show of hands. Okay, you see this? So this shows us something. And before I get into what I'm going to say, I'm going to make a little precondition to this. I'm going to tell you a little story. Well, matter of fact, an observation. I'm not much into raising animals, dogs. For any animal lover, it's not a spite against the animal lovers. But I've learned there are 2 types of dogs in America. When you're happy. You have the domesticated dog, where the master loves that dog. He'll groom him, he'll clean him, he'll feed him, he'll teach him tricks. He's happy. He'll even teach him how to protect the master. The second one is what I call the rogue dog. That's the one who has no master. The only thing that's a master is himself. He's the dog that might end up being in your trash one day, and you call the vets to come get him, to put him down, put him to sleep. He's the dog that might bite you because he doesn't fear you. The reason why I'm giving you that analogy is because if you understand what is going on when you talk about Islamophobia, you first have to understand what is fear. I remember there was an old acronym that went, fear is what? False evidence appearing real. I think it was contemporary philosophers, Parker and Moore, who said it's a fallacy. A fallacy is basically what? An argument or something put forth with no proof, no grounds, no evidence. I listened to both of them and I like what they had to say, but I'm going to put a little different twist on it. Ayyub is just a poster man, I won't say child, of what really goes on here in America. Ayyub happens to be one, black, poor, and Muslim. We're the only people here in America, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, that are created to be considered human beings. Now, with a Muslim, what? You're a Muslim? Oh, what's that make me now? You know, in order to understand a problem, you have to go back to the context. You have to go to the historical aspect of it. You have to go to the relevant aspect of it. And you have to go to the scriptural aspect of it. She told you something that many of you might not understood the terminology, Sharia law. But there's two things you got to understand about Sharia law that a lot of people have their fear about the Sharia law. First, you have to understand what is a jihad, which comes from the word jihada, which means one who struggles for their dignity, one who struggles to protect themselves, their land, their honor, their religion, their family. I think all human beings can do that, right? Right? We have a right to that, don't we? Okay. So we're on the same page. I like that. In the same line. Now, if you understand the Sharia, that just supports it, meaning it keeps it in its correct performance. When people say, what is a fundamentalist Islamic extremist? I don't even look at it. Because one thing, the Quran does not promote fundamentalists. The Quran does not promote extremists. The Quran promotes peace. But it also promotes the ideology and the understanding. If someone strikes you, you have the right to strike them back or give them mercy. Mercy doesn't mean that you punch me in the face, and so I forgive you. No, mercy meaning I'll give you that, but let's keep it in context. Let's come up with a solution so you don't do it again, because if you do it again, it's between me and you. Understand that? Now, when we talk about Ayyub, you're just looking at the face. It does not matter what race, creed, color, sexual orientation, or sexual preference, because we all have a right to what? Our dignity. But when you infringe upon our dignity, what we do, we start saying, well, you're infringing upon my human rights. Last time I checked, our human rights is a God-given right, right? So no law, precepts of law, or any type of anything as we consider what we will say. The Constitution can give me that right. It can't give you that right. Now, I had a conversation earlier today before I did this speech. And I started to write something, but I said, no, I don't have to write something. Because being 50 years old, almost, I can tell you the experience of what it is to be a Muslim in this country. Way before 9/11. Okay? The thing is, before 9/11, truthfully, most of the adherents over here in North America were people of color. This color. People didn't understand what the Muslim. Matter of fact, we'll go back to Malcolm X or the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. That was the first recorded, documented thing of a Muslim being recorded by the FBI. Okay? They don't tell you about that. So what happened, excuse me, I'm going to try a little water. What happened after that, the Nation of Islam came on the scene. They were heterodox. They were outside the mainstream religion of Orthodoxism. And what was going on was a lot of people saying, well, this is a black religion. This is a religion that's trying to do something against white America. So they went through their trials and tribulations. As time went on, you had other people that came forth. H. Rap Brown. You've heard of H. Rap Brown? I'm surprised I don't see him up there. He's doing life. He fought for this country, telling them right where it's at. Matter of fact, what was the thing he once said? American is violence, what, apple pie? See, but they don't talk about him. What has happened, they have made the public think that the only Muslim is Pakistani. That's what's going on. I'm being real. Because in order for me to be a Muslim, Allah says you have to give the truth for the truth. I have to be objective. Very objective. And this you have to be, because a lot of people say, well, 9/11. I like what she said about Iraq. Anybody ever heard of the Caspian Sea? Okay, you know what happened with the Caspian Sea. So those who don't know, I'll inform you. The reason why they went in and got Saddam is because the Caspian Sea happens to be a region near the sea where they had said 17 years prior to this invasion that it will help in the, how would you say, a better energy source for Western population, Western culture. That's what it was all about. See, they could have went in and got Saddam just like they got Noriega. They could have went in, well, got you. They got you. Now, bring this back to context. You know, the real fear I think that's really going on, if I'm objective. See, some of the people in America look at Islam and say, well, wait a minute. When these brothers or sisters strap up a bomb, they're doing it for this or that. Yes, they're frustrated. The same way that you and I, if we're frustrated that we can't eat, we don't have housing, we will steal, we will sell drugs, we will rob, we will do anything, because what is the first law of human beings? Law of self-preservation. So we put a spin on it. Now, this is where it really gets deep. It's only after 9/11 that people really started saying, well, who are these Muslims? And will they blow us up? Not a lot of Americans think like that. Because if they thought it like that, you wouldn't have Islam here now. Let's be realistic. Would you? Do you really think so? Think about it for a minute. When somebody doesn't want something, they'll stop it. Matter of fact, if you go back into the history, when the first Masjid, what was it, 1930 something over in Worcester, I think it is. I can't remember the exact date. Worcester, one of the first ones, yes. Or Quincy, excuse me, Quincy, Mass. I stand corrected. Here's my point. Be careful with your fallacies, your perceptions. Because sometimes, in helping a cause, you got to understand that cause. You really have to understand that cause. When this young lady had asked me this question this afternoon, earlier in school, she said, "Are you going to really be objective?" I said, "What do you mean? Are you really going to tell them the fears of the people?" I said, "Well, how can I tell them the fears of the people when I only can tell them the fears that I feel?" She said, "Well, tell them. This is one of the fears that I have found out. You know who kills the most Muslims? Who? Muslims. Muslims. So they're thinking, well, wait a minute. If you can kill each other, what's going to stop you from killing us?" See, when the Nation of Islam was over here, they weren't strapping up bombs and they weren't going down to the World Trade and blowing it up. So they thought in their mind, they said, oh, okay, so it's a passive religion. Because the Nation of Islam was passive. Almost like that dog I told you. The one that you can train him, domesticate him, feed him. But when you really look at it, when you got someone who has nothing to fear but their Lord, and the only thing they ask is the respect that they give you, and when you violate that sanctity of respect, now you have a problem. See, if you give a person the respect of dignity, you won't have this problem. There wouldn't be a fear. Because fear is only one step away from trying to understand somebody. If you think about it, that's the only thing that blocks you from trying to understand somebody. Think about it. I mean, really truthfully think about it. Matter of fact, I can give you one more story. I love telling stories. You see, I like data. I love statistics. You see, we're common people. It's good to know these numbers. They are more professionally inclined to give you these numbers. But I am more professionally inclined to give you my experience as a Muslim and black and poor in America. Now, there's a story about this bird. And this particular bird, he didn't want to go south with all the other birds. They were, well, it's your nature, migrate, it's time. He said, nah, I'm all right on this ranch. There's plenty of food. I'll catch you. I'll catch up. So they said, all right, you'll be sorry. Here his bird, he's on this branch, and he's happy. He's got worms all of a sudden. He got a branch all to himself. Couldn't get any better. The season started to change. The food started getting scarce. So he started going, woe is me. Woe is me. How did I get in this predicament? So one night it got very cold. And his wings froze. Got stuck together. He fell off the branch. And when he fell onto the ground, he was able to, when he's frozen wings, get a little worm here, a little worm here. Almost like basically saying, I'll make do for the moment, even though I'm in a bad situation. But I'm going to make do. So a cow comes along, and he messes over the bird. Now the bird's rolling around in his feces. He's warm. He's rolling around in this mess. He's still getting a little worm in there. It's not so bad. I can wait till tomorrow to get up out of here. Well, tomorrow never came. A cat came from behind the tree, pulled him out of the mess and ate him. You know what the moral of that story is? Everything or everyone in life that messes over you is not always your enemy. Everyone that pulls you out of mess is not always your friend. Perception. Perception. I say it again. Perception. If you came here tonight for Ayyub, you came for the wrong reason. But if you came here for a brother, a human being of the extension of the human family, welcome aboard, family. Understand? Now all those that's here for Ayyub, let me hear you say, I am.
I am.
But all those here for the human family, let me hear you say, I am. I am. Thank you.
I just want to mention there's some food in the back if people want to meander and eat a little bit. So we're going to open the floor up for questions. But if I can put Vera on the spot, maybe would you mind sharing for just a couple minutes some updates from today on Ayyub's case? What was the question? Thank you.
So we had talked to the attorney on our way back from doing a video shoot in downtown Springfield. We were on location where Ayyub was arrested, and back in December 9th of 2011, around 7 p.m., he had closed down his shop, Nature's Garden, and was going to, there's a little store in a gas station lot, and that's where the police stopped him and cuffed him and did a thorough pat frisk and found nothing on him, even though they were instructed, the two officers, to stop him and search for a gun. They threw him in the back of the cruiser and proceeded to conduct a more thorough pat frisk, and then a search in his underwear allegedly revealed a gun. And so that's what he's facing charges on, an unlicensed firearm, 15 years he could be sentenced up to. And the night that he was arrested, he was not recorded, audio or visual, when they interviewed him, so we haven't gone to trial yet, so that will get fleshed out during trial. And they never did a fingerprint analysis before they sent it to the state crime lab to do a testing of the gun, so they would fire it and everything. And they said they ran a FID check on Ayyub to see if he was licensed to carry a firearm. And we learned at a hearing a couple of weeks ago that indeed that never took place. There's a report that was provided through a Freedom of Information Act request that police never ran his name that evening. And so there are other more concerning problems with his case, this fabricated case, this manufactured case against him to force him to comply. And Ayyub has been harassed by the FBI, and he's actually complained about it to Ben Swan, the representative for the community, his community. And there was a phone call placed from that office to the FBI, and there was some voicemail or something, but so that's going to get fleshed out too during the trial, which was going to take place December 12th, but now it's been continued to February 18th. So hopefully students will be back. We'll have more time to organize with Springfield residents and get more support for Ayyub and more awareness. And when we were on location yesterday, we got an opportunity to just meet folks from the street, hand out our literature to cars that were driving by, and people saw, our cameras, people saw our music. Thank you, Sheldon Gaynor, who his music is online, and you can find more information on our Facebook page, JusticeforAyyub. And also we have a website that's incredible, done by a member of our team, and everybody's pretty much doing this from the base of our heart, and that's the best way of meeting people that I feel, and I've made so many friends along the way, people I haven't met, people that we've met along the way, but also new folks. So I'm really happy that there's a core group of people dedicated to visiting Ayyub now, and also just being there for him morally. And also I see folks from the Hampshire College community, the C Community Partnerships for Social Change, who brought in a lot of reinforcement for one of our court, the motion to suppress hearing, which got denied, I learned this morning. So the judge denied it. The decision is a 12-page decision, which will be made available on our website when we get it. It was getting proofread during the afternoon, so when we get it, we'll put it on our website so people can actually read why he ruled against it, and it's going to involve a lot around the legality of Ayyub's patent frisk and whether and when and where when he was arrested and at what point, and so it's about that. So it'll be very interesting to follow on that respect alone. So Ayyub, we visited him last night, and I think he tried to call in, and he was excited. I think yesterday he thought it was yesterday the talk, and so I think he was trying to call in just to see, just to get an update, because he's inside now because the $25,000 cash bail is out of reach right now, and he he's expressed, how much he wants to be around the circle, around that table with us when we talk about the events where we're going to do, how we're going to organize to get him out, and who else we need to reach out to, and what other things we need to do, like this panel right here is fabulous. So David Woodsum, thank you for your leadership in pulling this together. So that's my quick update, but we have folks that are, it's a collaborative effort, people who are doing our Facebook page, and also our website is incredible, so get up to date with that, using those tools, and just be with us. So I see a lot of people here, so that might be.
Questions. I'm just going to pass this around. If people have a couple of dollars, we're going to try and reimburse some of the speakers for gas, and the rest of the money is going to go to organizing for Justice for Ayyub. The $25,000 cash bail seems out of reach for now, but we're going to get $25,000, and we're going to get Ayyub out, and he's going to be with us soon. So if you have something, please pass it around. So, questions? Questions? No questions. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I had a question for the speaker from Albany.
Yes.
What were some of the other classifications of those cases? You said there was entrapment and can't remember the other one, but then you said there were some other minor ones. I was just wondering what those minor ones were.
What we do is we've looked at the cases to say, well, what kind of cases are they? So entrapment is the easiest one to explain. And then there's the charity financing. There's quite a number of people who've gone to prison for it, like Ghashan Alassi from the Holy Land Foundation was given 65 years in prison because he raised money for schools and hospitals in Palestine, which seems pretty excessive to me. And the government, our government even said not a penny of his money, of that money ever went to terrorism. Okay. And then there's some young men get caught up in these what we call training camp cases, where young men feel like they go overseas to go to a training camp, with Al Qaeda or whatever. And then there's cases where that we classify as others, such as Afia Siddiqui's case, which was an extremely unusual case, or Lynne Stewart, who was a lawyer. She went to prison because she vigorously defended her Muslim clients, and she's now dying of breast cancer in prison right now. So those are really the 4 types of cases that we look at.
This is not necessarily a question. I just want to say thank you for amazing talks. Thank you to all 3 of you, and thank you to everybody here. Clearly, this is not just a one-person thing. It's clearly a human rights thing, and I just want to express another gratitude. Thank you to everybody who put this on tonight.
Great.
I just have a question for the Project Salam, and also any other panelist who's been involved in organizing for the justice of prisoners. Is there any ideas, any formats that you guys have used to support? Because that we maybe use for Ayyub?
You mean in terms of being successful?
Activism,
Vying for power, or vying for status, or vying for position, you cannot have a revolution. See? So what I'm saying to you is this. Even in America, well, I've only been in America, so I'll take that back. It hurts me to my heart that given the amount that you said they could be raised for Ayyub, Western, I don't want to put it out there, but there's a lot of money in the Pioneer Valley with the Muslim community, and they're doing nothing. Yet the ones that are from the poor communities of Islam is here tonight. See, so they're showing me something. I can walk by somebody who's not from this country, and they won't even give me a salam. So you know what happens? The trickling down effect of the revolution? The people that's been living here say, well, if you don't consider us Muslims, you're not Muslims neither. There's an old saying, the doctor says, don't do this, don't do that. But the funny thing, sometimes the patients outlive the doctor. So when you irrigate yourself in a position, and you say that you think you know what you believe in, and you tell people this is what you believe in, but at the same time you deny your brother and sister and what you believe in, opposition. There can never be a revolution till there's unity.
I could just speak to the question of how do you raise awareness around Islam. I mean, it's a real challenge. Like, this is the one sort of form of racism that obviously the media has this, and it's quite hegemonic. But I think that you could see in some cases, probably around the NYPD surveillance, this report came out at the same time as the Occupy Wall Street movement happened. And so you had all over the world, people saw, the NYPD pepper spraying protesters. This is happening at the same time as organizing around, the execution of Troy Davis and stop and frisk. And at the same time, this AP report comes out that Muslims have been spied on, tens of thousands. And so it sort of, there was a confluence of that, but there was an actual movement and struggle around that emboldened, I think, the New York Muslim community to organize around it. And I think that's really what I think grabbed the attention of people and people's minds, the idea that obviously the NYPD is racist, and that really shifted things. The organizing and the ability for all these different activists and communities to sort of have this one kind of point of reference around the state and what it actually does, what it's actually doing in terms of brutalizing people and so on. So I think, it's a real challenge, but at the same time, I think that's why these protest and struggle around Ayyub and around these different cases really matters, because that's really the only way they're going to cover it. And I think just the sister who was saying, actually going out and organizing with people and meeting new people. I think what's really interesting about Springfield, just talking to a few people here, was that the history of the organizing around here has been very, organic. So, the prosecution of a cop like Jeffrey Asher, after he brutalized a man, the freeing of Charles Wilhite, that happened. I mean, it's incredibly rare for someone who's been accused of first-degree murder to be freed. A black man in America, it's incredibly rare. And I feel like and the fact that this organizing is coming off of that is really heartening. It's hard to sort of emphasize. In Boston, we don't have that. So I think it's just really important to say that the people in this room right now and the kind of accumulated organizing and experience you guys are having and deepening your relations in this community and being able to challenge that is just so important for I think getting out there and reversing the kinds of conceptions and Islamophobia. I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to that for just a bit. I think that that what happened in Albany is that we still, the arrest happened in 2004. It's 9 years ago the arrest happened for Arias and Hussein, and we did a press conference this week just without a lot of notice about a motion that we filed in this case. And everybody was there. All the press was there. Every single camera and every single TV station, every single print media had a reporter there. And it's because these days, when I just run into people, and of course I always talk about this because I won't shut up. And people, and I say, do you remember the two men who were arrested? And if anyone's in Albany, they'll always say, oh yeah, they're innocent. And I think it's because this small group of people, the peace group, came into, just like this group, came around these men, and we just won't stop. And we've done things like march to the FBI building. We have an annual march every year for the two men, and we just won't let it die. And that is, I think, one of the most important things that you can do I mean, the fact that this many people are here on a kind of miserable night outside, I think is absolutely fabulous.
Yeah.
And you had another question, but I don't know if I really understand it.
Okay, I was asking that if like they would be able to justify using the wiretap based on the results that they found.
Oh, that's a very good question. Would they be able to justify doing the wiretap because later they found something? I love that question because in Yassine's case, I don't know if I can answer that, but I can tell you that in Yassine's case, when they raided his house, they took all of his poetry and they took his writings and his speeches that he had written, 10 or 15 years earlier when he lived in northern Iraq. And they used some of his poetry against him at his trial. Can you imagine? Wow. So they justified the targeting of him because they found his poetry. Can you imagine?
Before we have another question, I'm sorry, I also wanted to address the question of like, how do we get the media? What do we do? Because every time we have an event, every time we organize, we get this question, and I feel like the personal responsibility to say, like, take a moment and like, yeah, look around at the people who are here. This is amazing that people are here, and in Ayyub's case, we called CBS, ABC, 22 News. We've sent out blasts. We've called NPR, but it's not like fashionable yet, or they have no reason to cover us yet. So what we're doing now is bringing together in conversation, and we're going back and sharing the videos from this and taking the photos, and it's like, we have the responsibility to do something, and what we're doing now, I think that question is a little bit disempowering, like how do we get the media on our side, or what do we do? We're doing it right now. So like, cheers to everyone for coming. You have a question, and then she'll speak.
Just wanted to piggy off of that, we've been collecting photographs of
Thank
people
you.
standing with I stand with Ayub. So before you leave tonight, it would be really great to get your photograph because it's been creating this amazing, powerful tapestry online, and we have a strong online presence.
Yeah, and what I just want to say, maybe like 10 more minutes of questions, and then we can eat food and mingle. Yeah. And with these photos, we've got a camera. If people are comfortable, we can get a photo of everyone and get this online. If you're on Twitter, #JusticeforAyyub, Free Ayyub. It's only because of Joe Merkin and other people who have been on Twitter, Sheldon, myself, that now a couple people are starting to ask questions, so please put it online. Sheldon.
I just want to let everybody know, 2 years prior, when Ayyub was arrested, there hasn't been one article on his arrest, on his detainment, anything involved with Ayyub at all. Not one article except an interview where a man was shot in his building he was managing. That is the only article, the only one. Since to date, there is still not an article by any major news source in Western Mass or the nation for that fact. Until 2 months ago, when we picked up after that, and on the case, and the people from Justice for Charles out now, everybody from Western Mass band together. When you look up Ayyub now, you see that maybe not thousands, but a whole bunch of links about his story, about his case, about his updates, and it's all from independent news sources. So big ups to everybody that's ever written anything, that's ever shared anything. We are the media. So just now people are asking questions, because now the story can come to light. So, yeah.
And you had a question?
I had a question. Thank you all for speaking. Great job. Woman from Albany, I'm sorry I don't...
Lynne Jackson.
Okay, Lynne. You were differentiating between the state case like Ayyub and then the federal. My question is, when the prosecution was happening on a federal level, what was going on in the courtroom? Was it just a federal judge making a decision? Were there jurors there? I mean, how were these decisions for them to go to jail? Who was making that final decision?
Well, most of it, like in Yassine and Muhammad's case, that was a jury trial in a federal courtroom, federal judge, federal, courtroom. It was made, some of the people, take a plea deal because Like, for example, Tariq Shah, whose mother lives around the corner from me, he took a plea deal because he was black and Muslim, so that was the end of that. And so he took a plea deal of 15 years. It's very, the difference now, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really, I can't tell you all the ins and outs, but from my perspective, the difference is the FBI has so much money and power. Like, I didn't really understand, because I always thought the FBI was the good guys until I got involved in this case. Okay, all right, so I was naive. Okay, but when you look at the, so Yassin and Muhammad, they had to have public defenders who were very good lawyers, by the way, very, very good lawyers. But when you have that power of the government and the fact that, well, secret evidence was used in the case, which is pretty appalling, and there's also different laws, and federal laws, it's a lot harder for someone to win. And when you look at these cases, like all because, of course, I feel this is connected to Guantanamo because, we have this horror going on in Guantanamo, and the whole idea, oh my goodness, if they bring the men from Guantanamo and try them in the civil system, they might, some of the men might prevail. And I'm like, they will never prevail. They would never win because the government never loses these cases, never. I mean, I could tell you just horror stories where you'd sit there and say, and what was the evidence? And there isn't any, and they still go to prison for horrific, unbelievable amounts of time. It's appalling.
So the judges are complicit. Everybody sounds like.
Yeah, well, a lot of judges are very conservative. A lot of them were, appointed by Ronald Reagan and stuff like that. And they've been around all the time. And
it's also, I mean, the government has such a hegemonic kind of when they're in the courtroom. I mean, the number of people they bring are these sort of experts around Islam who'll who'll rattle off all sorts of lies. They make sure that in the very beginning, for example, in Tariq Muhammad's case, the first media reports that came out were that he was attempting to shoot up a mall. That was never a charge in his case. But that picked up, and that became sort of the first time you heard about his case, and he was already framed in the media. And so then, once that case actually comes in, you have no evidence whatsoever. It's like he translated a document from Arabic. But the entire, it's an incredible, it was interesting because one juror actually came back and told Tariq's mother she regretted her decision or something like that, which is very interesting. But on the whole, I mean, they've already fabricated that case in the beginning, and then what you're seeing is basically this sort of the spectacle. They go through reams of online forums, and that's pretty much the entire case. They just